Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Barry from Moss Pond & Gun, and today we have another gun gripe episode for you. Today we're going to be discussing dry firing. All right, I know that that's a subject that in a lot of circles it tends to get kind of thrown around, and a lot of people don't know how to really respond to the idea of whether or not it's okay to dry fire firearms. We're going to go over some of the instances where, for one, it might be okay to dry fire some firearms, and then some instances where you should not dry fire firearms. So I suppose the gripe would be that people tend to, some people tend to get a little bit overly worried about dry firing, whereby others are just completely negligent when it comes to how they handle dry firing. In case you don't know, dry firing involves manually cycling and firing a gun without any ammunition in the gun. So Barry, let's get started. We got a little bit to go over here.
Well, I know you guys at the gun club or down when you're deer hunting and things like that, this subject has always come up. Now, dry firing is something that should not be done with certain guns under any circumstances. You should never dry fire a hammerless double barrel. You will damage the strikers and the breech face. That is a sure thing. That's going to happen.
Yeah, and the thing about this particular firearm is that it is a twist steel Damascus 1902 produced Remington Model 1900. So this is a type of firearm that, yeah, anything that's like a twist steel barrel or an older firearm, you really want to try to avoid dry firing, if at all. Now in this case, we actually have some snap caps. Now you can put these snap caps in the gun, and they actually have these little softened like primer areas here that will allow you to dry fire the firearm properly.
Right.
And be able to test for function and that sort of thing.
The firing pins are made of polymer, so you can strike them probably dozens and dozens of times without damaging it. Now, all your quality double barrels like Holland and Holland, they used to be issued with brass snap caps. They're always issued that way. You don't want to leave a double barrel cocked for a long, long time because the striker springs are under pressure, so you want to relieve those by using snap caps.
Precisely.
Now, there's other guns you can decock without dry firing them. Almost every centerfire bolt action, you cock the gun, it's cocked. If you open the bolt and pull the trigger, it decocks the gun without having to snap it.
It'll gently allow the striker to fall,
right,
you know, without any kind of damage to the firearm. Now, this particular gun is based on the Mauser action in terms of the trigger system. So generally, any of your bolt action rifles can be dry fired in the same manner, okay? And that's not a big deal.
They can be decocked in the same manner. Correct.
Hold down the trigger, drop the bolt, everything's good to go. So you can actually lower the striker on that gun without causing any damage.
Now we've got a Ruger Mini 30 here. We've taken the magazine out of it. The gun is cocked. You can pull the bolt back about halfway and pull the trigger and let the hammer ride down with the bolt. You do not have to dry fire this gun.
Right.
Most semi-automatic centerfires you can do the same way. M1 carbines, Garands,
AKs.
AK, you can do that with an AK.
Now, one note on the Mini 14 is that it is based on the Garand type principle. There's actually a cut in the back of this bolt, and the reason that they set it up that way and when they originally designed the M1 Garand was so that, let's say that the rifle was being fired and a round happened to chamber maybe out of battery. What would happen was the hammer would actually push the bolt into battery and fire the gun simultaneously. So it has that cut that the hammer will actually push the bolt into battery. So that's actually a safety feature that was integrated into the Garand, and it's tried to kind of hold true in some of the later designs. Now, whether or not the Mini 14 has it, I'm not exactly sure. However, that is something that was integrated into the original design.
The rear end of the bolt looks identical to a Garand, however.
Right, exactly.
Now, your AK-47 can be done the same way. Pull your bolt halfway back, drop your hammer, and let it push the bolt forward.
You're allowing the hammer to ride. Now, this is also what happens when you have what's called hammer follow. Let's say that you're shooting a semi-automatic like one of these really fast, okay? You're bump firing or whatever. When you call it outrunning the gun, when you outrun the gun, what happens is as the bolt is actually traveling forward, you are dropping the hammer at such a precise point that it is following the bolt home and doesn't have enough inertia or power to actually strike the firing pin with enough force to set off the gun. And that's what hammer follow is. So you're essentially, when you're dry firing a gun in that manner, you're actually hammer following the bolt on purpose so that the hammer doesn't actually fall and strike the firing pin.
The primer, right.
Right.
Now with some of your older revolvers, this is a Colt Army Special in 32-20. Now we refinish this gun here, we do that. The grips are in excellent condition. This gun has a hammer mounted firing pin. Normally it does not harm this gun to dry fire it, just like a hammer mounted Smith, but all the newer Smiths have a firing pin that's built into the frame. Now what happens when you dry fire a gun without a primer cushioning the blow? You're crystallizing the firing pin. It's that vibration every time it hits like that is shaking it.
Right.
And it cracks it. Now, I've broken 2 firing pins and H&R shotguns over the years by dry firing them. Before I knew better, when I was a kid, broke them by dry firing it. The primer actually cushions the firing pin and prevents it from breaking. If you
Correct.
sit there and snap it over and over and over, you're going to crystallize the firing pin and it's going to snap at some point.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the word cushioning, because cushioning is actually a phenomenon that happens with rimfire, revolvers, automatics, what have you. When you're talking about 22s, 22s actually headspace off of where the rim actually lays against the chamber.
Right.
So let's say you get a lot of dirt and debris that work their way into that area. It can cause a phenomenon called cushioning, and when it cushions, what happens is those dirt and debris actually cause the round to move forward a little bit, and it'll slow it down enough to where you'll get erratic ignitions.
Right.
So with a rimfire, you actually should never dry fire any rimfire. Now there's some modern rimfires that are probably okay, like this 1022, okay, sure, you can probably dry fire this a bit. Older 22 rifles should never be dry fired because the steel is not really, it's a little softer. Sometimes the firing pins are a little bit more brittle. They're not quite as good a quality, components, and you can actually damage the firearm by that firing pin striking the top part of the chamber. It can actually fold the metal over and cause feeding issues.
Right.
And what will happen is that metal will work its way down and it'll cause like a burr or lip on the top of the chamber, and it'll keep your stuff from extracting and chambering properly. So
when our Ruger corrected that problem years ago with the 1022, the firing pin is made to a precise length. If you dry fire this gun, the front of the firing pin will not strike the back of the chamber. However, you still have the problem of crystallization. I've seen 1022, a firing pin split lengthwise.
well, the nice thing about 1022s though is that the parts are prevalent and cheap enough to where if you do break a firing pin, it's really, really cheap and easy to replace. So don't worry about that quite so much. I mean, if you want to sit in your bedroom and practice dry firing your 1022, I don't really think it's that big of a deal. Just keep a firing pin or two handy. That's just prudent. If you've got a rimfire rifle that you're really wanting to put a lot of faith in or reliance on, you want to have some spare firing pins. That's just good planning.
Well, up until now, Eric, they haven't made 22 snap caps until recently. Normally, they're a turned aluminum bullet, and they're only designed to show you the function, how to load, how to unload safely. These are actually Packmare 22 rimfire snap caps.
Right.
Now, because the rim is thin, you can't use these over and over and over. That's why they give you so many of them.
Right.
But this will last you quite a while. If you want to dry fire your 22, go right ahead with these, but be sure you have these in it.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to dry firing, there's definitely a lot of do's and don'ts and everything. I know with revolvers, especially on this little Bearcat, it actually has a firing pin that is mounted on the inside of the frame.
In the frame.
Now, what this gun has built into it is also what's called a transfer bar. And what a transfer bar does is it's actually the kind of go-between between the face of the hammer and the back of the firing pin. The transfer bar moves up, the firing pin impacts the transfer bar, and then the transfer bar pushes forward and ignites the cartridge. Right. So modern 22s are definitely a little bit more resilient to dry firing, but that doesn't mean that you should just sit there and constantly work them, because you will make the firing pins brittle over time.
Well, let me add this too, Eric. A lot of people I know have had accidental discharges, which there is no such thing, but an accidental discharge because they were dry firing and the gun wasn't dry.
Right.
I've known several guys who unload their gun, line the bullets up, boom, 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 snap, snap, so on and so forth. They reload, and then they're not thinking, they pick the gun up and do it again.
Exactly.
I've had 3 friends that did that. 3 friends that did that. One was with a Model 29 Smith, one was with a Browning High Power, and one was with a 1911.
Sure.
Dry firing, anytime you dry fire, even with snap caps in it, you should point the gun in a safe direction. That way, if it does fire, it can't do any damage.
So here we've got a little Winchester Model 190.
Right.
This was a very popular rimfire rifle for a very long time. It was only dropped from Winchester's catalog, I think, about as late as about late 90s.
Right.
I think they dropped it around 2000 in that ballpark, maybe a little earlier. But good quality rimfire rifle. This is another example of one of those guns that you should probably not dry fire. I mean, most rimfire guns, you're going to want to stray away from the concept of dry firing, you know, just for the purposes of making sure the gun's not under any kind of mechanical stresses. Now, there's many guns out there that are perfectly okay to dry fire. Glock, for example, they're known for, you know, when you disassemble them, you have to dry fire them first.
Right.
So dry firing is actually part of the disassembly process. Same thing for the Springfield XD. However, on the Springfield XD, you can cock your gun, rotate the takedown lever, and then let the slide release go. And as it's actually, you know, being let forward, you can squeeze the trigger and you can somewhat ride the striker forward, making it a little bit easier.
Well, the Smith & Wesson M&P has a feature built into it. You can take it apart like a Glock if you want to dry fire it. Otherwise, you open the slide, there's a little hook in there that's painted yellow. You take that and push it down, and then you don't have to dry fire it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's always that idea too.
Right.
But generally, you know, dry firing is one of those things. I know it's a very hot subject from a lot of circles. A lot of people say, you can do it. Some people say, you should never do it. In fact, I'm looking at a gun on the rack right now. We got a Springfield trapdoor. Okay. Now, some guns, like older military firearms, if you're looking at like a Springfield trapdoor or an old 11 millimeter Dutch Beaumont, like what I have in some of the videos, you know, my old 11 by 52 Beaumont that I shoot all the time. Now, those guns obviously have very old components, old springs. Everything in them has just been, you know, embrittled and aged. So obviously, yeah, I mean, you don't want to dry fire like an original trapdoor or a Dryce needle gun or a Beaumont or a flintlock or anything like that. You know, older firearms should always be treated with respect when it comes to dry firing.
What I'd also like to add, Eric, you can dry fire your guns to your heart content, but don't ever dry fire someone else's gun. Don't do that. That is a breach of etiquette beyond anything. You don't dry fire someone else's gun.
Right. I would say that, you know, that's definitely one of the areas you have to, you know, exercise care. And, you know, us, as coming from a gun store's perspective, now if a customer comes in and they're serious about buying a firearm and they say, hey, mind if I dry fire this? I want to see how the trigger is. And now if it's in the interest of buying the gun, okay, sure. You know, we can understand that. But people come in and, you know, they'll grab the gun, they'll cycle it, and they'll point it right at you and dry fire it. You know, that kind of stuff can be a little off-putting just because it's improper, well, for one, improper firearms handling, and then two, it's just bad etiquette. I mean, you should never dry fire someone's firearm without, you know, asking. So
I've had friends want to examine one of my guns, and the first thing they do is safety. They clear the weapon. They be sure it's clear, and then they go, snap.
Yeah.
Not a good idea. Just don't do that to someone else's gun, please.
Yeah, and some people are a little bit too timid or bashful to even mention it to you. They might not say, hey, don't dry fire my damn gun. But they're probably thinking, like, hey, that guy just dry fired my pistol or my revolver or whatever. So, yeah, at the end of the day, hopefully you guys learned a little bit about, you know, dry firing do's and don'ts. And there's definitely models of guns that we didn't cover here. There's instances that we didn't cover. But if you guys have any stories of your own about dry firing, or if there's certain guns that you know are okay or not okay to dry fire, be sure to leave your comments below. We'll be sure to entertain those suggestions. And maybe we'll come back to this subject in a later video. But I would definitely invite you guys to check out our Facebook page. Like us on Facebook. We're going to be doing a ton of cool things, giveaways, all kind of behind-the-scenes posts that we're always putting up. Be sure to check out the members-only section of our website. You can have access to exclusive content, all kind of neat things that we're posting there. Probably about 3 or 4 videos a month. Right now, I think we're up to close to 14 videos. So that's doing quite well. But look, we appreciate you guys watching this evening, and we hope you'll tune in next week.
Well, I hope we've educated y'all a little bit on this thing, and you know, let us know with your comments. What's your experience with dry firing?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. We hope y'all had a good evening here and enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one, people.
Thank you now.